garnish on the top, so.
Well, I'm going to try it.
I mean, you can't go wrong with ginger beer.
Oh, that is really good. I like that.
Greg earlier today was like, I don't think I've had it by itself. He goes, do we still have that bottle in the fridge? Because I made him a dark and stormy the other day. Because we're trying to get rid of the rum. So, the reason I made a Pim's Cup, besides the fact that I constantly crave them, felt lovely about it because I want to tell you about the Ear Inn in New York.
Okay. All right.
It seems like it's something that's like super up my alley because you know how I love dive bars.
I know we've been to a few.
Yeah, a mighty few. When we were in New Orleans, I took them to the chart room, assuming they would enjoy it as much as I was like, it's locals. It's like a little shitty dive bar. It's way the far away from Bourbon Street, which is my favorite type of
Agreed.
area.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, okay. I was like, okay, sorry. Back to Antiques? I got nothing. But this is one of their particular drinks that I thought we would both enjoy.
We do.
we do. Although Handlebar no longer is serving them, I think about the Handlebar Pim's Cups all the time.
They're very good, or
They're
they were
so
very good.
They also have what's called the Gold Rush, which is ginger liqueur, bourbon, and lime juice.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be in a coup glass, and it sounds like it's going to be in my mouth immediately. That's it. And then I have like a hate-love relationship, mostly hate, but a little bit of love for Saint Germain, which is another kind of like bitter cocktail.
Yeah.
They also have a Saint Summer, which is Saint Germain, Tito's, lime, and it's served up. But it just reminds me of a gimlet with a little bit of Saint Germain in it.
I'm not mad at that.
Yeah, I grew up on gimlets. I've gotten many of my friends drunk on gimlets. Peanut almost fell out of my car window after I made her into a full prosthetic zombie.
Oh, no.
There's a lot of things about this bar that hyper interest me. Obviously, there's the ghost because we're talking paranormal right now.
Yeah.
They don't fry their foods, which makes my tummy happy.
Yeah.
Including all their burgers, which is their specialty.
Oh, I love a good burger.
I know.
I really do.
You and I talked about this a little bit earlier, where the history is a bit strange on some of this. There's a book that's written on this.
Okay.
And the only place that I could find it was, it may have been UIC. I looked for every PDF. I found it on Amazon, but it wouldn't ship in time.
What's it called?
It's a book called Ear in Viron's History of the Landmark James Brown House, which I'm legitimately interested to read. A lot of it kind of seems a bit dicey. It doesn't seem, especially in like the earlier years, because this is going back to late 1700s or early 1800s.
Okay.
It doesn't seem like it's very well documented, this particular house. We'll get into that in a second. It is one of the oldest and supposedly most haunted bars in the entirety of New York. It's only surpassed by 2 other bars, which is really neat. A lot of the original structure still exists.
Okay.
The history, especially going back this far, is a bit dicey.
Which I understand. Because I've been there. With a lot of that old stuff, it's hard to sometimes
pick and choose what's actually true.
Yeah, like what's the definitive date?
It sits at 326 Spring Street. In some of the things that I have read, it says that it was established and constructed in 1770.
Okay.
A lot of the other things I was reading had said that it was originally constructed in 1812.
Oh, that's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, and then there's another one that says more often that it was erected and settled in 1817.
Okay.
Just a 5-year jump. I'm not sure exactly what the date is. It's citing more the book, which I would trust more than some of the sources. Not sure. Unfortunately, this is something that has been boggling my mind for a minute.
Well, here's what we do know. It's old, girl.
It was originally settled by James Brown, not obviously our current James Brown.
I assumed.
Yeah. It was settled in an area that was being transformed from hilled swampland to what they were assuming was going to be a settled residential upscale area.
Okay. All right.
The river was like right there, and not in a pretty way. Not like, oh, I just stepped out and there's a river outside. It was like, well, we're going to put docks and piers here, and people are going to just go right on ahead and throw their wares at you from a ship 5 feet away.
Hello, mosquitoes.
We have mosquito problems here, and we have no lake anywhere near us. So I guess upscale, but not sure. The reason it's called the James Brown House is because it was constructed and eventually would belong to Revolutionary War veteran and supposed former former aide to George Washington, James Brown.
All right.
I found a letter from George Washington to his wife that cited a James Brown, but I also not 100% sure that it was actually referring to him, so I left it out. Mm-hmm. One of the issues with some of the ideas of him owning this house is that not many records were kept on freed slaves, especially if they were landowners.
And he was a freed slave.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was supposedly depicted in the most famous of paintings, where George Washington is crossing Delaware with all the boats.
Okay.
I looked very hard. I saw so many dudes. Didn't see someone that may reflect James Brown in that, but maybe he's there and I can't see it, and I'm not a historian. The house was a federal or Adams-style home that referred to the simple square rectangular shape of what was usually a 2 to 3 story house. Technically was considered to be a townhouse. Obviously our townhouses now, not exactly the same, but pretty much the same sort of thought process, where it's rectangular, a couple rooms deep, and then a couple stories high. I guess at least out here, dependent.
Yeah.
It was also one of the first homes that had a dormer roof in the neighborhood, and at the time cost about $2,000 to build.
Ooh, fancy. Wait, $2,000 back in the 1700s? Mm-hmm. Really? I would think
or
it would be
dependent
more.
1800s.
Wow.
Is kind of an expensive area for a divey bar to still exist.
Yeah.
It's reported that Brown had used the first floor to sell tobacco, and knowing that the Hudson was 5 feet away from the actual physical door of the house.
Oh, wow.
Wow. I assume he was doing a nice trade. In 1833, he had sold the house off, and there was some amount of fill dirt that would expand the area to make way for piers and a number of other different things that would help the trade in the area. It's kind of akin to like Gold Coast in Chicago.
Okay, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Put the landfill out and extend the property, and then put a bunch of really expensive houses on that.
Okay.
After that, a number of other humans had ownership of it, one of which was Thomas Cloak. He was an Irish immigrant. He had bought the house in 1890, and shortly thereafter had started brewing beer with his brother Patrick in his backyard, and they both used the basement as a place to distill and bottle corn whiskey.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, I think we might be them reincarnate. If I were good at doing either of those things.
Yeah, I don't know how to do those things.
I've watched a little bit too much about distilling, like a lot too much about distilling whiskey.
Well, let's start making it.
Right. Together, Cloak and his brother ran a successful saloon in the former James Brown house. It was prime time. It was almost what some have reported the closest restaurant and bar to where the sailors and passengers of any ship would get off.
Yeah.
So not only were they dealing in trade, but whiskey.
Yeah, which everybody likes.
Right. When they weren't selling as much as they wanted to at their particular saloon, they would go to the docks and be like, hey, you want some beer? You don't want beer? You want some whiskey?
You want some whiskey, though? Yeah, I know you do.
Apparently, they also had the best prices in the city for the quality of wares that they were selling.
Sounds like a great place. I would have shopped there.
It's also one of the first records of there being a restaurant on the property of the James Brown house. They served primarily sailors, but due to the clientele, the restaurant soon became synonymous with prostitution and other, quote, nefarious deeds.
Ooh, scandal.
Mm-hmm. After temporary wartime temperance movement in 1917, Cloak had seemed to assume the permanence of something maybe coming in the future, which of course it was, because we all know about prohibition.
Yeah.
He had this weird preternatural ability to predict that the 18th Amendment was coming and was going to be passed into law.
Well, I mean, he was Irish. He could just feel it in his bones.
The 18th Amendment obviously passed through Congress, and he had leased and eventually sold the property to John Rolandi shortly before it actually passed into real law.
Yeah.
New York, by the way, during Prohibition, had ratified the 18th Amendment in 1920, and although the public was first very behind it, within 5 years, the quote-unquote noble experiment had failed. It's estimated by a lot of people that there were over 100,000 speakeasies in New York City alone. So many, in fact, that New York was known as, quote, the city on a still.
I want to go to a speakeasy.
I could take you to literally 10 right now.
I know. That's why I said it to you. I know.
I know where all of them are. Okay. The coast between Canada and New York eventually developed as a, quote, rum row to supply the states. And after the 21st Amendment was approved by Congress, which is the repeal of Prohibition, New Yorkers voted almost 8-1 in favor of repeal. Thankfully, the 21st Amendment, the repeal of Prohibition, was ratified on December 5th in 1933, which is why we have Prohibition Day and the eve of repeal. During this time, Rolandi, the new owner, was seemingly unhurt by the movement, operating as usual, but operating as well as secret speakeasy in the back.
Because of course.
Of course. And the upper rooms had served as, quote, hoarding flops, a brothel.
Brothel! I knew it was a brothel!
And a smuggler's den.
Yay!
Of course it was. It's really close to the docks.
Oh, I love it.
So this is where we get into things that I care about more, I think, than a lot of people do, because it's a lot of artists and like bohemians. It's the people that I would have hung out with if I had any sort of cool points, which I don't. It continued to operate. It never had a name besides James Brown House. Eventually, when it was a speakeasy, it was called the Brown House. The only other thought process they had was the Green Door, because guess what that place had?
Oh, was it a red door?
It was a red door, yeah. They were just being funny. During the time, more sex work had happened. There was a lot of smuggling as well, but they still were operating as a restaurant. After Prohibition had stopped, they didn't have to hide it anymore and were giving out drinks.
Yeah.
At some point in time, there was a reference in something that I read that said that the sailors that had come off the ships to the shore were given a meal for free as long as they also purchased alcohol.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Well, let's be honest, they probably wanted a drink.
I mean, there's a lot of feelings I have about this. I was like, everything about this makes me feel fucking solid. The problem with me feeling solid about this is up until the 60s, it was a gentleman-only situation. So aside from the sex workers, it was only dudes allowed in the bar at any and all times. So I guess I would just have to dress up, and I look good as a man.
Yeah. And even though I am a man, I would have just dressed it up as a sex worker for funsies.
You would have gotten a lot of money, though. You would have had to shave your beard and mustache.
I mean, everybody is somebody's flavor.
One of my favorite quotes that I found about the Green Door, by the way, is the Green Door is literal. It has no significance other than the door to the establishment being green. And it still is. Okay. When it was operating as the Green Door, it relied on word-of-mouth reputation. At this time, the dock had actually been extended, and piers were built farther away, so it was a little bit harder to get to, but still quite close to the shoreline. Their motto was known from coast to coast. See, this is where I think it's kind of funny, because obviously, stop putting things in the water, humans. The shoreline was like, no, we used to go way farther back. What are you encroaching on my space here? And it kept taking away all the dirt until finally, obviously, it was pretty much cemented there. Oh. And the water wasn't able to get to it. So they would go a couple feet and then the feet would come back every once in a while. The upstairs apartment had gone through many iterations. So it was a boarding house for a little while, obviously a smuggler's den, a brothel, and sometimes a doctor's office. Not sure why.
For when you feel like paying money to play doctor.
Oh, no. That's awful. The ground floor pretty much has remained some sort of restaurant / pub / tavern / whatever you want to call it. I saw something that says that it has Irish decor for some of their roots.
It's not meant to be like a pub. No?
No, it's a really divey bar.
Okay.
Huge fan. Huge fan. It looks like I live there. It's just a bunch of like weird shit nailed to the walls. In 1966, it was added to the historical registry. And in 1969, New York named it as a historical site. Hooray.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy that you said that, because I was gonna ask you about that a little while ago, if it was on there, and now I know.
Outside of the bar, there's a plaque where the shoreline used to be, and it's like, this is where the shoreline was, and there's a little post. And then there's a plaque outside that says James Brown House. Apparently, some of their earliest clientele were Revolutionary War heroes, which makes sense if James Brown were to have lived there.
Yeah.
There's nothing to back that up. Also, things that aren't going to be backed up are going to come in a second.
Well, I'm excited.
In 1977, the bar had changed hands again. At this point in time, it had been condemned a few different times.
Oh, lovely.
In 1977, Martin Sheridan and Richard Rip Heyman, two people that were living above the bar, and this was Lower Greenwich Village.
Okay.
So artsy-fartsy scene.
Yes.
For sure a place I would have preferred to be as a human if I were alive at the time.
Well, yeah. And isn't Greenwich Village where the Stonewall riot happened? In 1969, that was.
But this is Lower Greenwich.
Okay. All right.
Both